Have you ever been told that showing your emotions is a sign of strength, that being vulnerable and authentic is the path to deeper connections? What if I told you this popular wisdom might actually be setting you up for disappointment and pain? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. We live in a culture that increasingly celebrates emotional expression. Social media is flooded with influencers sharing tearful breakdowns, celebrities discussing their anxieties, and relationship gurus insisting that emotional availability is the cornerstone of healthy connections. But has this trend actually made us happier or more stable? Has this openness really improved our relationships? Stay with me until the end, because what we're about to explore contradicts much of what modern psychology promotes. This isn't about suppressing your feelings or becoming cold and distant. Rather, it's about understanding the hidden cost of emotional transparency in a world that isn't always deserving of your vulnerability. Think about the last time you openly shared your deepest insecurities or emotional struggles with someone. Did they truly honor that vulnerability, or did you later feel exposed, perhaps even regretful? The uncomfortable truth is that when we constantly seek validation through emotional openness, we often place our psychological well-being in the hands of others. This perpetual search for approval through emotional availability creates a dangerous cycle. We become dependent on external validation, our emotional state fluctuating with each response we receive. Before long, this dependency transforms into anxiety, instability, and a fragmented sense of self. What you're about to discover might surprise you, especially if you've embraced the vulnerability is strength mindset that dominates our cultural conversation. The reality is that truly powerful individuals understand when to share and when to shield their emotions. They recognize that emotional control isn't about suppression. It's about strategic expression. Has this ever happened to you? You've opened up completely to someone only to have that vulnerability later used against you. Or perhaps you've noticed how those who seem to maintain a certain emotional distance often command more respect and stability in their relationships. This isn't coincidental. There's a fundamental misunderstanding about the role of emotional expression in human psychology and social dynamics. The question isn't whether emotions are good or bad. They're simply information. The real question is, who deserves access to this information and under what circumstances? As we continue this exploration, we'll challenge some deeply held beliefs about emotional expression, examine the psychological mechanisms behind emotional control, and uncover strategies for maintaining your emotional integrity in a world that constantly demands access to your innermost feelings. If this video gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe now and join us for more powerful insights every day. Machiavelli knew the power of appearing unpredictable while remaining calculated in his actions. Think of it like a chess master who doesn't reveal their strategy through facial expressions or nervous habits. When you care too deeply about outcomes, your emotional investment becomes visible to others. Your face flushes, your voice wavers, your eyes dart around nervously. These subtle tells broadcast your intentions like a billboard. The transformation happens when you realize that emotional detachment isn't about becoming cold or heartless. It's about creating space between your feelings and your actions. This hidden truth that powerful people understand is that reactions can be chosen rather than automatic. When someone criticizes your work, the inexperienced person immediately defends themselves, reveals their insecurity, and hands power to the critic. The emotionally intelligent person pauses, considers the criticism objectively, and responds strategically rather than reactively. Behind the scenes of nearly every significant negotiation, deal, or social interaction, this principle is at work. Those who master their emotional responses gain an almost supernatural advantage. They can observe others losing control while maintaining their composure, collecting valuable information about weaknesses and desires that can later be leveraged. I'm reminded of a revelation from my own journey, watching a friend negotiate the purchase of his dream car. While most people walk into dealerships radiating excitement, he deliberately maintained a neutral expression and even pointed out flaws in the vehicle he secretly adored. The salesperson, unable to read his true interest level, eventually offered a price far below market value just to secure the sale. My friends practiced emotional discipline directly translated to thousands in savings. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic of emotional control by examining how it applies in challenging personal relationships. We all face situations where someone pushes our buttons deliberately, knowing exactly which emotions to trigger to gain advantage. This is where the principle becomes not just useful, but essential for protecting your mental health and maintaining your position. The impact of mastering this skill extends far beyond individual interactions. When you consistently demonstrate emotional stability, people begin to treat you differently. They're less likely to test boundaries, more inclined to respect your time, and more careful about how they approach you. This isn't manipulation, it's establishing psychological boundaries that others naturally respect. What's fascinating is how this principle creates a positive feedback loop. As you practice emotional detachment in situations that previously triggered you, your brain literally rewires itself. Neural pathways associated with automatic reactions weaken, while pathways supporting thoughtful responses strengthen. Your baseline emotional state becomes calmer, making the practice easier over time. If you've ever experienced that moment where something that would have previously ruined your entire day barely registers as an annoyance now, you've witnessed this principle at work in your own life. That's the evidence of your growing emotional intelligence and self-mastery. Type in the comments, "I choose my reactions," if you've recognized moments where you successfully maintained your composure when others were trying to provoke an emotional response from you. Now, this strategic indifference isn't just about ignoring things, it's about redirecting your energy in a calculated way. Think about it like this. Your attention is a currency, and every time you react emotionally to something or someone, you're making an investment. But unlike financial investments, emotional ones don't always give you returns. In fact, they often create vulnerabilities others can exploit. I've witnessed this transformation in people who've mastered the art of strategic indifference. They move through life with a certain gravity. People naturally orbit around them rather than the other way around. It's not about being cold or uncaring. It's about being selective with your emotional bandwidth. Don't just watch. From the shadows, subscribe today and become part of this movement of unstoppable minds. Here's where most people get it wrong. They think caring deeply about everything signals virtue or strength. In reality, it creates a scattered existence where your energy is constantly drained by matters that ultimately don't serve your well-being or goals. The hidden truth is that people who react to everything control nothing, while those who carefully choose their battles maintain their power. Consider your daily journey through social media, workplace politics, or family dynamics. How often do you find yourself caught in emotional whirlpools that, in retrospect, weren't worth the mental toll? Strategic indifference offers an escape route from these cyclical patterns of reactivity. This mindset shift doesn't happen overnight. It requires recognizing the difference between meaningful engagement and energy-draining reactions. Behind the scenes, those who master this principle are constantly evaluating, does this deserve my emotional investment? Rather than responding by default, they make conscious decisions about where their energy goes. The irony is that as you become more selective with your emotional investments, people often respect you more, not less. There's something compelling about someone who isn't easily swayed by every passing storm. You become the steady point in a chaotic environment, which paradoxically increases your impact on others. One of the most profound revelations comes when you realize how much mental clarity you gain through strategic indifference. Without the constant noise of unnecessary emotional reactions, you can hear your own thoughts better. You can distinguish between what truly matters to you and what's merely urgent to others. If any of this resonates with your experiences, write strategic silence in the comments, because sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. What if I told you that in moments of emotional intensity, your greatest power often lies not in what you say, but in what you withhold? This realization transformed my approach to difficult conversations and emotional intelligence altogether. When someone upsets you, there's this immediate urge to explain your feelings, to make them understand exactly how they've hurt you. But here's the revelation that changed everything for me. Detailed emotional explanations rarely achieve what we hope they will. Instead, they often hand over emotional leverage to the very people who disturbed our peace. Think about what happens in these moments. By meticulously breaking down your emotional state, you're essentially providing a roadmap of your vulnerabilities. You're saying, here's precisely how to affect me. This isn't just about personal relationships. This principle extends into professional settings, negotiations, and virtually any human interaction where power dynamics exist. The strategic mindset here isn't about being cold or calculating. Rather, it's about understanding the hidden architecture of human interaction. When you feel emotionally triggered, taking a measured pause creates space for clarity. This silence isn't empty, it's filled with decision-making power. I've seen this psychological journey play out countless times. Someone who habitually explains their emotional reactions gradually loses standing in their relationships. Meanwhile, those who master the art of measured response gain an almost mysterious quality that others find compelling. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring how this balancing act between logic and emotion creates what I call emotional sovereignty. When you protect your emotional landscape from invasive questions and explanations, you create boundaries that others instinctively respect. Consider how often we've been conditioned to believe that emotional transparency equals emotional health. There's profound wisdom in selectively choosing what aspects of your emotional world to share and with whom. Some emotions are like delicate seedlings that need protection before they're ready for exposure to the elements. What makes this approach so powerful is that it doesn't require you to be emotionless. Quite the opposite. It allows you to honor your emotions privately while presenting a composed exterior when strategic thinking demands it. This duality is where true emotional intelligence flourishes. The internal transformation that happens when you stop over-explaining your feelings is remarkable. Your emotional responses become less reactive and more intentional. You begin making decisions from a centered place rather than from the edges of your emotions. Learning this balance has been one of the most liberating journeys in my personal development. It's not about suppression, it's about direction, about channeling emotional energy purposefully rather than dispersing it through endless explanations. If you've recognized this pattern in your own life, times when explaining less actually gave you more control over a situation, type emotional sovereignty in the comments. I'm curious how many of you have already discovered this hidden truth about human interaction. When we talk about strategic indifference, it's crucial to understand we're not advocating for emotional numbness. This isn't about becoming a robot, devoid of feelings or compassion. Rather, it's about mastering the art of selective reaction, choosing when and how to respond instead of being at the mercy of your immediate emotional impulses. Think of strategic indifference as a form of emotional intelligence on steroids. It's the difference between having emotions and being had by them. When someone attempts to provoke you and you maintain composure, you're demonstrating remarkable inner strength. This composure creates a fascinating psychological dynamic. It introduces unpredictability into your interactions. The uncomfortable truth most people miss is that human beings are pattern recognition machines. We feel secure when we can predict others' responses. When you refuse to provide the expected emotional reaction, you create a pattern interruption that can be profoundly unsettling to others. This is precisely where your power lies. I've witnessed countless transformations in people who embraced this mindset. One client of mine, a woman who felt constantly manipulated by her passive-aggressive colleague, began practicing strategic indifference. Instead of becoming visibly frustrated by subtle jabs during meetings, she would acknowledge the comment without emotional charge and redirect to the business at hand. Within weeks, the dynamic had completely shifted. Her colleague's behavior changed because the emotional reward was no longer available. The journey toward mastering strategic indifference isn't always straightforward. Many of us have been conditioned since childhood to believe that every stimulus deserves a response. Breaking this automatic reaction pattern requires conscious effort and practice. It's about creating a space between stimulus and response, where your freedom to choose resides. What's particularly fascinating about this approach is how it reveals hidden truths about your relationships. When you stop providing predictable emotional reactions, you'll quickly discover which connections are based on genuine mutual respect and which ones thrive on emotional manipulation. The revelation here isn't just about gaining power over others, it's about reclaiming ownership of your internal landscape. By choosing your reactions deliberately, you take back control of your emotional energy and direct it toward what truly matters to you. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring how strategic indifference can be applied in specific challenging situations you might encounter daily. If this perspective on strategic indifference has given you a new insight, write emotional freedom in the comments below. This kind of emotional minimalism isn't merely a defensive posture, it becomes a transformation in how you process the world around you. I've discovered through my own journey that this approach gradually reshapes your entire reality. When you practice detachment consistently, you gain a clarity that feels almost supernatural. Suddenly you perceive the hidden currents that drive social interactions. What's fascinating is how this mindset shift reveals the emotional choreography happening in everyday exchanges. You'll start noticing when someone is trying to pull you into their emotional vortex, whether it's a colleague attempting to offload their stress, a family member seeking to entangle you in drama, or even marketing designed to trigger your insecurities. It's like suddenly seeing the matrix code behind human behavior. The impact on your decision-making becomes profound. Without the noise of constant emotional reactions, you create space for genuine discernment. This doesn't mean becoming cold or unfeeling, quite the opposite. Your empathy actually deepens because it becomes a conscious choice rather than an automatic response. You can truly be present for others without being swept away by their emotional state. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring what I call strategic vulnerability. This is where the real power lies. Emotional minimalism isn't about building impenetrable walls. It's about installing selective gates. You consciously choose when, where, and with whom to share your emotional energy. This selectivity becomes your superpower. The revelations that come from practicing this approach can be startling. You'll find yourself noticing patterns in your own behavior that previously operated below your awareness. Perhaps you've been unconsciously seeking validation through emotional displays, or maybe you've developed habits of emotional reactivity that no longer serve you. These Realizations, while sometimes uncomfortable, offer incredible opportunities for growth. Behind the scenes of emotional minimalism is a profound respect for your own energy. Consider your emotional capacity as a precious resource, one that should be invested wisely rather than leaked away through unconscious habits. When you approach your emotional life with this level of intentionality, you naturally become more discerning about the relationships and commitments you maintain. The journey toward emotional minimalism isn't always straightforward. There will be moments when old patterns resurface, when you find yourself pulled into emotional entanglements despite your best intentions. But each time you notice this happening is an opportunity to refine your practice, to strengthen your ability to maintain perspective, even in challenging circumstances. If anything I've shared resonates with your experience, write emotional freedom in the comments. I'm curious how many of you are already practicing some form of this approach in your own lives. Emotional detachment functions as a strategic shield in social dynamics, but there's a profound transformation that happens when you master this skill. It's not about becoming cold or unfeeling. It's about creating a safe distance between your core self and the chaos of external reactions. Think about the last time someone pushed your emotional buttons. Maybe a colleague took credit for your work, or someone close to you made a cutting remark. That immediate surge of emotion, the heat rising to your face, the tightening in your chest, those reactions don't just happen internally. They manifest in micro-expressions, tone shifts, and body language that others can read like an open book. When you practice emotional detachment, you're essentially creating a buffer zone, a mental space where you can observe your emotions without being immediately consumed by them. This buffer zone is where your true power resides. It's the revelation that most people never discover. Emotions experienced aren't the problem. It's the immediate reaction to those emotions that creates vulnerability. The journey toward emotional detachment begins with awareness. Start noticing how predictable your emotional responses have become. Do certain phrases or situations consistently trigger the same reaction from you? That predictability is what others can leverage against you. The most powerful people in any room are those whose next move can't be anticipated. Their emotional responses aren't following an obvious script. Behind the scenes of every successful negotiation, promotion, or relationship milestone, you'll find someone who understood when to engage emotionally and when to detach. This isn't manipulation, it's emotional intelligence at its highest form. The hidden truth is that emotional detachment actually enables deeper, more authentic connections because you're choosing your responses rather than being driven by them. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining how emotional detachment applies differently across various relationships in your life. The impact this can have on your professional trajectory is especially noteworthy, as emotional control often separates leaders from followers in high-stakes environments. If what I'm saying resonates with your experiences, write in the comments, "I'm reclaiming my emotional power." I'd love to know who else is working on mastering this crucial aspect of personal development. When you start to understand that your energy is a finite currency, you begin noticing how many invisible transactions you make throughout your day. That sudden drop in mood after scrolling social media, the mental fatigue from an unnecessary argument, or that lingering frustration when someone cuts you off in traffic. These are all subtle withdrawals from your energetic bank account. What many don't realize in their journey toward personal sovereignty is that true power lies not in how you respond, but in what you choose not to respond to. Think about it. Have you ever noticed how the most influential people seem unbothered by provocations that would derail others? There's a hidden truth here that transformed my own approach to daily interactions. When someone attempts to provoke you, they're essentially requesting a transaction. They're asking you to invest your precious energy in their agenda. By refusing to react, you're not being passive. You're making a deliberate decision to protect your resources. This boundary setting is perhaps one of the most misunderstood forms of strength in our reaction-driven culture. I discovered this revelation during a period when I found myself constantly drained, always fighting battles that in retrospect weren't mine to fight. My mentor shared something that fundamentally shifted my perspective. The need to defend yourself is often ego disguised as self-respect. This distinction became a compass for navigating provocations. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining what happens physiologically when we choose non-reaction. When someone provokes you and you refuse to engage, you're literally rewiring neural pathways that would typically trigger your stress response. This intentional rewiring creates space between stimulus and response, what psychologists call the growth zone, where your true power resides. Consider implementing what I call the 3-breath pause. When faced with a potential energy drain, take 3 full breaths before deciding if this situation deserves your investment. This tiny ritual has helped countless people reclaim their autonomy in heated moments. The impact of this practice extends far beyond individual interactions. As you consistently guard your energy, you'll notice a ripple effect touching every aspect of your life, from clearer decision-making to deeper relationships built on mutual respect rather than reactive patterns. What's particularly fascinating is how this principle transcends cultural contexts. From ancient Stoic philosophers to modern psychological research, the message remains consistent. Your response is your responsibility, and non-reaction to provocation is a universal signature of inner strength. If what I'm sharing resonates with your own experiences of energy conservation, write in the comments, "I'm reclaiming my power." I'd love to hear about specific situations where you've practiced this principle and what differences you've noticed. This control over emotions isn't just political strategy, it's a fundamental aspect of personal sovereignty. When you walk into a room and maintain complete emotional stability, something fascinating happens. You become the gravitational center. Think about the last time you encountered someone who remained perfectly composed while everyone else reacted. Didn't they seem somehow more powerful? Machiavelli understood this dynamic. Centuries before modern psychology gave it a name. Today, we might call it emotional intelligence, but it's really about emotional independence. The prince who rules effectively isn't swayed by the emotional currents around him. He creates his own weather, so to speak. What's particularly interesting is how this principle manifests in everyday relationships. Consider your last disagreement with someone close to you. Who maintained greater composure, and who ultimately had more influence over the outcome? There's a direct correlation between emotional reactivity and surrendered power. This isn't about becoming cold or unfeeling. Rather, it's about developing the capacity to choose your emotional responses deliberately instead of being at their mercy. The transformation comes when you realize emotions are signals, not commands. You can acknowledge anger without becoming angry. You can recognize fear without becoming fearful. The hidden truth here is that most people unwittingly abdicate their sovereignty dozens of times daily through unconscious emotional reactions. Each time you respond automatically to a trigger, you're essentially saying, "This external circumstance controls my internal state." That's the opposite of sovereignty. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining how this principle creates asymmetrical power dynamics in social settings. When you remain emotionally centered while others fluctuate, you gain what Machiavelli might call the higher ground. You can observe patterns, anticipate reactions, and navigate situations with greater clarity and purpose. The journey toward emotional sovereignty begins with awareness. Notice how external circumstances affect your internal state. Observe without judgment how your emotions arise and how they influence your thinking. This metacognitive ability, watching yourself react, creates the necessary space between stimulus and response where true choice resides. What's fascinating is how this practice ripples through every aspect of life. Business negotiations, family dynamics, romantic relationships all transform when you operate from a place of emotional choice rather than emotional compulsion. The person who needs nothing emotionally from an interaction typically gains everything of substance. Have you noticed how the most compelling leaders, regardless of field, share this quality? They possess an emotional steadiness that inspires confidence. They don't eliminate emotions, they channel them purposefully. This is the essence of what I'm describing, not emotional suppression, but emotional direction. If any of this resonates with your experiences, write "Sovereignty starts within" in the comments below. Think about it this way. When you step back emotionally, it creates a psychological vacuum that often draws others in. It's a fascinating transformation in relationship dynamics that few people truly understand. When you're completely available and emotionally transparent, the other person has no journey to embark on, no mystery to solve, but introduce some emotional distance, and suddenly you've created space for curiosity and imagination. I want to go deeper into this Machiavellian principle that applies far beyond just relationships. This strategic detachment represents a fundamental shift in mindset that affects every interaction. When you operate from a place of emotional reactivity, you're essentially surrendering control over how situations unfold. You become predictable, and in many contexts, whether business negotiations, leadership positions, or personal relationships, predictability diminishes your influence. The hidden truth here is that human beings are naturally drawn to what they can't fully understand or possess. It's the same psychological mechanism that makes rare things more valuable, that makes challenges more rewarding when overcome. By creating a certain level of emotional unavailability, you're not being manipulative. You're creating space for the other person's interest to develop organically rather than forcing it. This approach requires patience and a willingness to look beyond immediate gratification. Most people operate on short timelines emotionally. They want validation now, they want certainty now, they want emotional fulfillment now. The strategic thinker understands the power of delayed emotional investment. They're playing chess while others are playing checkers, considering how each emotional move creates ripples across the entire relationship landscape. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because there's something profoundly important about understanding the difference between manipulative games and strategic self-preservation. This detachment strategy isn't about creating artificial barriers. It's about maintaining healthy boundaries while allowing authentic connection to develop at its own pace. When you rush emotional intimacy, you often build relationships on shaky foundations that collapse under the first sign of real pressure. The revelations come when you observe how this principle manifests in your own life. Think about the times when your intense interest in something or someone faded precisely when they became too available, too predictable, or conversely, how your curiosity peaked when something remained slightly out of reach, when there was still territory to explore. If you're nodding along as you hear this and thinking, "This explains so many of my past interactions," type revelation in the comments. I'd love to know how many of you have experienced this principle in action, perhaps without even realizing there was a pattern behind it. Picture a high-stakes poker game where millions are on the line. The player who wins isn't necessarily the one with the best cards, but the one whose face reveals nothing. This is the profound advantage of becoming emotionally unreadable in our everyday interactions. When people can't decipher what you're feeling, they lose their leverage over you. I've observed this transformation in clients who mastered the art of emotional control. They report a remarkable shift in how others treat them. Colleagues who once dismissed their ideas now listen attentively. Relationships that were once unbalanced become equal playing fields. It's not about becoming cold or detached. Rather, it's about choosing when and how to reveal your emotional cards. This journey toward emotional mastery begins with a fundamental mindset shift, recognizing that your emotions are yours alone to manage. When someone says something hurtful, the natural reaction is to let them see your pain or anger. But what happens when you don't give them that satisfaction? The dynamic changes instantly. The hidden truth is that most people are constantly broadcasting their emotional states through micro-expressions, body language, and voice modulation. They're like open books while you're becoming a fascinating mystery. This creates an unconscious power differential that others can sense but rarely identify. One particularly powerful technique involves creating a slight delay between feeling an emotion and showing any reaction. This brief pause, even just 3 seconds, gives you the space to choose your response rather than being hijacked by your immediate reaction. In those 3 seconds lies your freedom. I've witnessed remarkable revelations from individuals who've mastered this skill in professional settings. One executive told me how she went from being constantly interrupted in meetings to having everyone hang on her every word. Her secret wasn't speaking louder or more aggressively. It was developing an unreadable quality that made others work harder to understand her perspective. This internal revolution creates ripple effects through every relationship in your life. When your emotional responses become choices rather than automatic reactions, you reclaim sovereignty over your inner world. The impact is profound, not just on how others perceive you, but on how you experience your own life. Now, I want to go even deeper into the practical applications of this approach. What happens when we apply these principles to specific challenging situations where emotions typically run high? How can emotional unreadability transform conflicts from destructive to productive? If you're resonating with these ideas so far, write in the comments, "I'm reclaiming my emotional power." I'd love to know who's on this journey with me. Recognizing these manipulation tactics is really just the first step in your journey toward emotional sovereignty. What I've found most transformative isn't just spotting the manipulation, but mastering how we respond to it. When someone tries to trigger your guilt, shame, or fear, your most powerful weapon isn't arguing back or proving them wrong. It's your calculated indifference. Think of emotional control as the ultimate form of self-protection. When you maintain your composure in the face of manipulation, you're essentially saying, "I acknowledge what you're trying to do here, but I'm not playing this game." This isn't about becoming cold-hearted or dismissive of genuine connections. The distinction here is crucial. The emotional discipline I'm describing is selective. It's about conserving your emotional energy for relationships and situations that deserve it, while creating boundaries around those attempting to exploit your feelings for their gain. This selective emotional investment represents a profound shift in how many of us have been conditioned to interact. Society often portrays emotional availability and constant empathy as virtues without limits. The hidden truth is that unlimited emotional availability makes you vulnerable to those who see your compassion as a resource to be exploited rather than respected. Behind the scenes of every balanced relationship is this unspoken understanding. Emotions are valuable currency. When you practice emotional discipline, you're not just protecting yourself, you're actually setting the stage for more authentic connections based on mutual respect rather than emotional leverage. The journey toward this kind of emotional mastery isn't linear. You'll have moments of reverting to old patterns, feeling the pull to justify yourself or become defensive when manipulated. That's completely normal. Each interaction becomes a learning opportunity, a chance to refine your response and strengthen your resolve. What surprises most people when they begin practicing this emotional discipline is how quickly manipulators lose interest when their tactics don't produce the desired effect. It's almost as if they have an internal script that falls apart when you don't provide your expected lines. Their power diminishes substantially when you refuse to engage with their manipulative framework. Now, I want to go even deeper into the real world. Application of these principles, exploring how they function in different types of relationships and situations you might encounter daily. These techniques work whether you're dealing with a manipulative family member, colleague, or even in more casual social interactions. If you've ever experienced this kind of manipulation in your life and recognize these patterns, write "breaking free" in the comments below. When someone no longer values your presence, remember that your response defines your journey. Instead of chasing validation, focus inward. This silent transformation becomes your most powerful statement, one that requires no words, just consistent action and self-improvement. Think about the last time someone took you for granted. The natural instinct might be to explain your worth, to convince them of what they're missing. But there's a profound revelation in choosing another path, pouring that energy into yourself instead. This isn't about revenge or calculated games. It's about the fundamental truth that your growth happens regardless of who's watching. When you detach your progress from others' validation, you discover a freedom that few experience, the ability to evolve purely for yourself. The remarkable thing about this approach is how it naturally reframes your mindset. Rather than feeling rejected, you begin to see their distance as space you needed for expansion. This perspective shift doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual awakening to your own value that transforms how you navigate relationships. Behind the scenes of every successful personal evolution is this quiet decision to redirect energy. I've witnessed countless stories of people who, facing dismissal from others, chose to channel that emotion into learning new skills, strengthening their bodies, or cultivating their talents. The common thread? They all describe this decision as the turning point that changed everything. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring what actually happens when you make this shift. The initial weeks might feel strange, perhaps even lonely. You might question if your silence is even noticed. But as you continue investing in yourself, something remarkable begins to unfold. Your confidence starts radiating without effort. Your decisions become clearer because they're no longer clouded by seeking approval. The hidden truth is that your absence creates a vacuum that speaks volumes. While you're busy building your life, those who dismissed you often begin to wonder what you're doing, who you're becoming, and more importantly, why you no longer seem affected by their absence. This isn't about creating mystery to manipulate. It's about the natural curiosity that emerges when someone witnesses genuine self-sufficiency. What's fascinating is how this approach reveals who truly belongs in your life. Some people will suddenly reappear when they sense your independence. Others will respect your journey from afar, and many will regret not appreciating you when they had the chance. Not because you plotted for this outcome, but because your growth made your value undeniable. If any of these insights resonates with your own experience, write "silent growth" in the comments. I'm curious how many of you have already discovered this powerful truth for yourselves. This counterintuitive approach to relationships actually reveals a profound truth about human psychology. When someone knows they have constant access to your time, attention, and emotional energy, they rarely pause to question what life would be like without those gifts. Your permanent availability becomes their expected baseline, not something to be cherished. I've witnessed this transformation firsthand in countless relationships. The person who makes themselves scarce, not out of manipulation but genuine self-respect, often discovers others begin to value their presence more meaningfully. It's the fundamental principle behind the concept of healthy boundaries, though rarely discussed so directly. What's happening beneath the surface is a recalibration of relationship dynamics. By creating space, you're not just protecting your mental well-being, you're offering others the opportunity to recognize your true worth through the contrast of your absence. This isn't about manufacturing artificial scarcity, it's about honoring the reality that your peace is genuinely precious and not infinitely available. The journey toward establishing this kind of boundary often involves uncomfortable revelations. Many of us have been conditioned to believe that constant availability equals loyalty or love. Breaking free from this mindset requires confronting deep-seated beliefs about our value and purpose in relationships. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining what actually happens when you begin implementing this approach. The initial response might surprise you. Some people will push back. They've grown accustomed to your unlimited accessibility and may interpret your boundary setting as rejection. This reaction isn't evidence you're doing something wrong. Rather, it confirms how necessary the boundary was in the first place. This protective distance creates something invaluable: perspective. From this vantage point, you can finally see clearly which relationships drain you and which truly nourish your spirit. The emotional clarity gained through this process becomes the foundation for healthier connections. Moving forward, what's particularly fascinating is how this principle applies across all relationship types: romantic partnerships, friendships, family dynamics, and even professional interactions. The universal response to thoughtful distance remains remarkably consistent, revealing just how deeply this psychological principle is woven into human nature. The hidden impact of this approach extends beyond just earning respect. It catalyzes a profound internal shift where you begin recognizing your inherent value independent of others' validation. This represents the true transformation, from seeking external approval to standing confidently in your self-worth. If you're nodding along while reading this, type "boundaries are self-respect" in the comments. I'm curious how many of you have already discovered this truth through your own experiences. This power of detachment becomes even more fascinating when we look at it through the lens of emotional intelligence. Think about it. When you're emotionally detached, you're creating a buffer zone between external stimuli and your internal response. This isn't about becoming cold or unfeeling. Rather, it's about developing the discernment to choose which emotions deserve your energy. In the battlefield of daily interactions, the person who maintains this emotional sovereignty often emerges as the natural leader. They aren't swayed by momentary praise or criticism. Their inner compass remains steady, regardless of the emotional weather. Around them, this stability becomes their hidden advantage. I've observed this transformation in my own journey. There was a time when I would obsess over every comment, every facial expression, every subtle cue that someone might be displeased with me. The mental bandwidth this consumed was extraordinary. It was like running sophisticated emotional surveillance equipment 24/7, and the power drain was immense. The revelation came when I realized that this hyper-attentiveness to others' reactions was actually diminishing my authentic presence. By constantly adjusting myself based on external feedback, I was never fully inhabiting my own truth. The impact of this realization was profound. What's particularly interesting is how this detachment principle intersects with ancient wisdom traditions. Stoics called it apatheia, not apathy as we understand it today, but a state of mind where you aren't disturbed by passions. Buddhists speak of non-attachment. These philosophies have endured for millennia precisely because they address a fundamental human challenge: how to remain centered in a world that constantly pulls at your emotional strings. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic: by examining the practical applications of emotional detachment in your everyday decisions. When you're negotiating, whether for a salary or simply deciding where to have dinner with friends, being the person who can walk away without emotional turmoil gives you tremendous leverage. Not because you're manipulating others, but because you're operating from a place of genuine choice rather than emotional necessity. This mindset shift ripples through every aspect of life, from relationships to career moves to personal goals. The person who needs nothing specific to happen is paradoxically more likely to create the outcomes they desire. It's one of those beautiful contradictions that reveals a deeper truth about human psychology. If you're nodding along as I explain this concept, drop emotional freedom in the comments below. I'm curious to know how many of you recognize this pattern in your own experiences. Now, I want to go even deeper into the psychology behind these power dynamics. When employing strategic silence, what you're essentially doing is creating a vacuum that others feel compelled to fill. This isn't just about social dominance, it's about understanding the fundamental human aversion to ambiguity and uncertainty. Think about those moments when someone stops responding to you mid-conversation. The discomfort you feel isn't random, it's your brain desperately seeking closure, clarity, and resolution. By withholding that resolution, the person controlling the silence gains a psychological advantage that's almost primal in nature. The journey toward mastering this technique requires a significant internal transformation. Most of us have been conditioned since childhood to fill awkward silences, to respond immediately, to show our emotional cards. Breaking these deeply ingrained social patterns demands a complete mindset shift about what conversations actually are. Not exchanges of information, but subtle negotiations of power and position. What's particularly fascinating is how this practice reveals the hidden truth about social hierarchies. In almost any group, observe who speaks, who interrupts, and who creates and controls silence. These patterns reveal more about the actual power structure than any organizational chart ever could. But here's the revelation that few discuss. Strategic silence doesn't just change how others perceive you, it fundamentally alters how you perceive yourself. When you no longer feel compelled to fill every moment with words, you begin to notice thoughts and insights that previously vanished in your rush to respond. This internal clarity becomes its own form of power. The emotionless reaction piece is equally profound. By refusing to mirror others' emotional states, you're essentially declining to dance to their emotional rhythm. This creates a situation where they must either escalate dramatically, which makes them appear unstable, or adapt to your emotional baseline. Most people, consciously or not, choose the latter. I've seen this principle transform confrontational situations into productive dialogues. When someone approaches with anger and is met with calm neutrality, there's often a moment of recalibration, almost visible in their expression, as they realize their emotional state isn't achieving the desired effect. Of course, these techniques come with ethical considerations. The line between strategic communication and manipulation can blur, especially when power imbalances already exist. The most impactful communicators use these methods not to dominate others, but to create space for more authentic and meaningful exchanges. If this perspective on silence as power resonates with your experiences, write "The Silence Speaks" in the comments below. Now let me share some specific scenarios where this approach completely changes the outcome. The most profound power moves often happen in silence. When you adopt indifference towards social validation, you're not just protecting your emotional state, you're reclaiming your personal sovereignty. This is the hidden transformation that few discuss openly. Think about how much energy we expend seeking approval. Every time you check for likes, adjust your opinion to fit in, or feel that sting when someone criticizes you, That's your power leaking away, dripping into a pool that others control. The journey toward genuine confidence begins when you realize that this transaction isn't worth the cost. What's fascinating is how this indifference ripples through your interactions. When you stop chasing validation, people can sense it. There's something magnetic about someone who isn't desperately seeking approval. It creates a gravity that pulls others toward you rather than pushing you to chase after them. This isn't manipulation. It's simply the natural order reasserting itself. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring what happens in moments of conflict. When someone attempts to provoke you emotionally, they're essentially fishing for control. They cast out hooks of insults, criticism, or dismissal, hoping you'll bite. The moment you react, whether with anger, defensiveness, or even trying to prove yourself, you've handed them exactly what they wanted. Confirmation that they can affect your emotional state. But what happens when you respond with calm silence instead? The power dynamic shifts immediately. Their hooks find no purchase. The bait dangles, ignored. This creates a fascinating psychological vacuum that can be more devastating than any comeback you might deliver. In that space of non-reaction, they're forced to confront their own intentions and behavior without your emotional energy to feed on. Consider how rare this response is in our reaction-driven culture. We're conditioned to believe that having the last word equals winning, that defending ourselves equals strength. But true emotional dominance often manifests as the ability to remain unmoved when everyone expects you to react. It's not about suppressing emotions. It's about choosing which emotions deserve your energy and which provocations aren't worth your response. This approach doesn't just apply to obvious confrontations. It works in subtle power dynamics too. In meetings where someone tries to undermine you, in relationships where emotional manipulation occurs, or in daily interactions where social pressure attempts to steer your decisions. The person who maintains their emotional center holds the ultimate leverage in any situation. The revelation here isn't just about winning social games, it's about reclaiming your attention and energy for what truly matters to you. Because when you're no longer driven by the need for external validation, you're free to direct your focus toward your own values and priorities rather than constantly responding to others' expectations. If what I'm saying resonates with your experiences, write in the comments. I choose where my energy goes. I'm curious, how many of you have already discovered this truth in your own lives? This journey toward emotional detachment isn't just about protection. It's a profound transformation that reshapes your entire reality. When you develop this skill, you begin to notice how many interactions around you are based on emotional reactivity rather than conscious choice. Think about it. How many decisions have you made from a place of fear, guilt, or the desperate need for approval? Each of those moments was an opportunity for someone to direct your actions. The hidden truth is that emotional detachment actually enhances your capacity for genuine connection. Counterintuitive, right? But when you're no longer desperately seeking validation or avoiding rejection, you can choose relationships based on actual compatibility and mutual respect. Your connections become deliberate rather than desperate. I've witnessed remarkable revelations in people who master this practice. One woman I worked with realized she had spent 20 years in a career she disliked because her emotional attachment to her parents' expectations made it impossible to disappoint them. Once she developed emotional detachment, she could finally evaluate her path objectively and make changes that honored her authentic self. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic. The mastery of emotional detachment requires recognizing the difference between responding and reacting. Reacting is automatic, often unconscious, and driven by emotional triggers buried in your past experiences. Responding, however, involves that crucial pause, that moment of awareness where you reclaim your power of choice. This distinction becomes your compass through difficult interactions. When someone attempts to provoke you through criticism, guilt, or flattery, your developing emotional detachment allows you to think, interesting approach, I wonder what they're trying to achieve here. Instead of being swept away in the emotional current they've created, you remain anchored in your own clarity. The impact of this mindset shift extends far beyond personal relationships. In professional settings, emotional detachment transforms your negotiating power. When you're not emotionally invested in a specific outcome, you gain tremendous leverage. You can calmly walk away from unfavorable terms, while someone operating from emotional need might accept almost anything just to avoid the discomfort of conflict or rejection. Behind the scenes of most successful leadership is precisely this capacity for strategic emotional detachment. It's not coldness, it's clarity. It's the ability to make decisions based on well-reasoned principles rather than emotional pressures. Remember that this journey isn't linear. You'll have moments of remarkable detachment followed by situations that still hook you emotionally. That's not failure, it's feedback. Each trigger becomes valuable information about where your growth edge lies, revealing which emotional attachments still require your attention and conscious releasing. The freedom that comes with emotional detachment is incomparable. Imagine moving through life guided by your values and intentions rather than pushed and pulled by emotional manipulation. Imagine the peace of knowing that regardless of how others behave, your inner stability remains intact. If you've ever experienced that moment of clarity where someone's attempt to manipulate you suddenly became transparent and lost its power, drop a comment saying, "I see through it now." I'd love to know how many of you have already started experiencing these moments of empowered awareness. Think about it. Emotional detachment isn't about becoming cold or unfeeling. It's a deliberate choice that creates space between your core self and the chaos that surrounds you. This psychological distance transforms your decision-making process completely. When you're not bound by emotional reactions, you gain remarkable clarity about what truly serves your interests. Let me share something most people overlook. Power dynamics exist in every relationship, whether we acknowledge them or not. The person who needs the relationship least often holds the most influence. This isn't manipulation, it's human nature. By cultivating healthy detachment, you position yourself to make decisions based on value rather than fear of loss or abandonment. The journey toward emotional sovereignty reveals hidden truths about our interactions. We often sacrifice our autonomy without realizing it, giving others implicit permission to dictate our emotional states. Through the lens of Machiavellian wisdom, we can see that surrendering this power rarely earns us the respect or love we seek. It typically achieves the opposite. Notice how people who maintain healthy boundaries tend to command more respect in their relationships. This isn't coincidence, but rather a natural response to someone who values themselves enough to establish limits. The transformation happens internally first, when you genuinely believe you'll be fine, regardless of whether someone stays or goes. That conviction radiates outward and reshapes how others perceive and treat you. I've witnessed countless individuals reclaim their personal power through this process. One particularly striking case involved someone who had spent years attempting to please an unappreciative partner. Only when they stepped back emotionally and focused on their own fulfillment did the relationship dynamics shift dramatically, either improving or revealing itself as unsustainable. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring how emotional detachment can be particularly valuable during periods of conflict or negotiation. When others are operating from an emotional place, your ability to maintain composure becomes an extraordinary advantage. It allows you to observe patterns, anticipate reactions, and respond strategically rather than reactively. This mindset shift represents one of the most profound personal evolutions available to us. It's not about manipulation, but liberation, freeing yourself from the endless cycle of emotional reactivity that keeps so many people trapped in unfulfilling patterns. The paradox here is fascinating. By being prepared to walk away from situations that don't serve you, you often create circumstances where walking away becomes unnecessary. If what I've described resonates with your experience or challenges you're facing, write "sovereignty matters" in the comments. Now let's examine how these principles apply specifically to modern relationships and career environments. The art of emotional discipline doesn't require you to become a robot. Quite the opposite. It demands awareness of your full emotional spectrum while refusing to be imprisoned by it. Many confuse emotional coldness with emotional numbness, but they couldn't be more different. True coldness is actually a heightened state of clarity, where emotions are processed through the filter of strategic intention rather than impulsive reaction. Think about it. In your most emotionally reactive moments, were you truly in control of the situation? Probably not. The hidden truth about emotional mastery is that it's actually a form of presence, not absence. When you operate from this centered place, a remarkable transformation begins to unfold in how others perceive and respond to you. People are naturally drawn to those who remain steady when everyone else is swayed by emotional currents. It's a paradox worth noting. The more you liberate yourself from emotional dependency, the more emotionally intelligent you become. You start recognizing emotional patterns in others while maintaining your own baseline of calm. Determination. Behind the scenes of most successful negotiations, leadership decisions, and personal breakthroughs is this exact type of emotional sovereignty. When you're no longer chasing emotional validation or avoiding emotional discomfort, you discover an entirely new landscape of possibilities. I've witnessed this journey in myself and countless others. There's a profound sense of liberation that comes when you realize emotions are simply data points, valuable information to be considered, but never the final authority on your actions. This shift in perspective transforms not just how you feel, but how you think, decide, and ultimately, how you impact the world around you. Now, I want to go even deeper into this pivotal mindset shift. The most significant revelation comes when you begin to see emotions as tools rather than masters. Many people spend their entire lives serving their emotional states, making decisions based on what feels good rather than what serves their long-term vision. But when you flip that dynamic, when you make emotions serve you instead, everything changes. Consider how differently you approach challenges when you're emotionally invested versus emotionally disciplined. The emotionally invested person rides waves of hope and disappointment, celebrating prematurely or giving up too soon. The emotionally disciplined person maintains consistent effort regardless of temporary feelings, understanding that the path to anything worthwhile contains both comfort and discomfort. What's fascinating is that this approach doesn't diminish your emotional intelligence. It enhances it. You become more attuned to emotional nuances precisely because you're not consumed by them. You can notice the subtle emotional cues others miss because they're too busy managing their own emotional reactions. If any of this resonates with your experience, write "emotional sovereignty" in the comments. I'm curious how many of you have already begun recognizing this pattern in your own development. The journey to emotional discipline isn't about reaching some distant destination. It's happening right now, in this moment of awareness and choice. When you start living from this place of emotional sovereignty, you'll notice that people respond differently to you. They feel your steadiness, your centeredness, even if they can't quite name what it is about your presence that draws them in. And that's the beautiful irony. By becoming less emotionally reactive, You actually develop deeper emotional connections. You create space for others to feel safe, to be authentic, to trust that you won't crumble or lash out when challenges arise. If this conversation has stirred something in you today, I'd love to hear about it. Leave emotional sovereignty in the comments if you've reached this point in our exploration together. I read every comment and I'm genuinely interested in where you are in this journey. If you found value in these ideas, consider subscribing to join our growing community of people committed to meaningful personal growth. And if this resonated with you, a simple like helps others discover this conversation too. There's a video right here that takes these principles even further and shows you how to apply emotional discipline in high-pressure situations. Click and continue with me over there. Our conversation is just getting started.